Once upon a time, in a small town surrounded by silent hills and restless rivers, lived a boy named Arif. He was ordinary in every visible sense, yet inside him existed a storm he never understood. His family was modest. His father ran a tiny shop that barely survived the seasons, and his mother worked tirelessly at home. Dreams in their household were like fragile glass, admired from a distance but never held long enough for fear they would break. Arif was born with questions in his eyes. From childhood, he often stared at the horizon, asking himself why some people rose to greatness while others stayed hidden in the shadows of mediocrity. He was not the brightest in studies, nor the strongest in sports, yet he carried a deep hunger to matter, to leave a mark. This hunger, however, remained silent as he grew. Teachers called him average, friends often overlooked him, and life seemed content with reminding him that he was just another face in the crowd. But destiny is strange. It often hides its sharpest blades in moments of despair. When Arif was 18, tragedy struck. His father's small shop, the one that kept food on their plates, collapsed under debt. Collectors came, voices rose, tears fell, and suddenly the boy who once dreamed of being something greater was thrown into a pit of responsibility. He worked odd jobs, from carrying loads in the market to helping at construction sites, to support his family. Nights became heavier than days. While the world slept, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering why fate was so cruel to those who asked for so little. One night, after another long day of humiliation where he had been insulted for being a poor laborer's son who should know his place, Arif walked alone along the riverside. The water reflected the moon, calm yet flowing, relentless in its journey. He whispered to himself, "Why do I feel like I don't belong here? Why do I feel like I am meant for something more, when the world only shows me less?" That night marked the beginning of a silent vow. Arif decided he would not die unknown. He would rise, not just for himself but for his family, for every person who ever felt small, invisible, and trapped by circumstances. He didn't know how, but he knew he would fight. The fight began with knowledge. Books became his weapon. He couldn't afford new ones, so he borrowed old, torn copies from a nearby library. He read about great leaders, thinkers, entrepreneurs, athletes, and ordinary people who turned pain into power. Every story lit a fire in him. He underlined words like resilience, persistence, courage, and repeated them until they carved themselves into his heart. But knowledge without action is like a sword left rusting in the rain. Arif soon realized that reading was not enough, he needed to do. He tried applying for jobs that required skills he didn't yet have. He was rejected dozens of times. People laughed at him for even daring to dream. But with every rejection, he told himself, "This is not the end. This is training." Slowly, he taught himself new skills: communication, writing, basic technology, leadership. He practiced late into the night. He stumbled, failed, tried again. The mirror in his room became his audience as he rehearsed speeches, sometimes shouting until his throat burned, sometimes whispering until tears rolled down his cheeks. Years passed. Struggle became his companion, and growth became his obsession. By the time he was 22, Arif had transformed into someone different. Not successful yet, but unrecognizable from the boy who once thought he had no chance. He carried himself with a quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to scream to be noticed. Then came his first big break. A local community event invited speakers to motivate the youth. Arif, still unknown, requested a chance. He stood on that stage in front of barely 50 people, his palms sweating, his voice trembling at first. But as he spoke, he poured his soul out, his failures, his hunger, his determination. His words weren't polished, but they were real, and real as a power that polished never will. By the end, the room was silent, and then it erupted with applause. For the first time, Arif felt the electricity of purpose. That day he understood that his voice, his story, could be his gift to the world. He didn't need to be born rich or talented. He needed to be authentic, relentless, and brave enough to keep showing up. But success doesn't come in straight lines. With each small victory came bigger challenges. Critics grew louder, responsibilities grew heavier, and loneliness often gnawed at his spirit. There were nights he wanted to quit, mornings he woke up wondering if it was all just foolishness. One particularly dark phase came when his mother fell severely ill. Hospital bills stacked higher than his earnings, and he found himself at the edge of breaking again. He worked 3 jobs, slept barely 2 hours a night, and yet the money wasn't enough. Standing in a pharmacy one evening, unable to afford the medicine his mother needed, he broke down. Tears streamed, his fists clenched, and he cursed life for its cruelty. But then he remembered the boy who had stood by the river years ago, whispering vows to himself. He remembered the applause of those 50 people, the fire he had felt on that stage. He wiped his tears and whispered, "Not yet. I am not done yet." That night, Arif made another vow, this time fiercer. He would rise higher, not just to survive but to thrive. The following years were a storm. He spoke at schools, colleges, small organizations, anywhere that allowed him to share his story. At first, he was paid nothing. Sometimes he had to walk miles because he couldn't afford bus fare. Yet he delivered every speech as if it were to thousands. Slowly, people noticed. A local newspaper wrote about him. Invitations grew. He started earning modest amounts. What fueled him wasn't the money, though he needed it, but the eyes of those who listened, eyes that lit up with hope, that whispered silently, "If he can, maybe I can too." With each speech, Arif grew bolder. His words became sharper, his presence stronger. He learned to turn pain into poetry, struggle into strength, and setbacks into stepping stones. By the time he was 27, Arif was no longer just another boy. He was a voice people waited to hear. He had spoken to thousands, written articles that spread across social media, and built a small but powerful movement around the idea that no life is too small to change, no dream too impossible to chase. But life wasn't done testing him. Success attracts envy, and with envy comes sabotage. False rumors spread. People questioned his integrity. Some accused him of using his story only for fame. Sponsorships pulled out, events got canceled, and for a while, it felt like he was back to square one. Arif fell into depression. He isolated himself, questioned everything he had built. For months, he stopped speaking. The silence that once gave him clarity now suffocated him. And then, one day, he received a letter. It was from a young girl who had once attended one of his free speeches. She wrote, "I was about to give up on life, but your words reminded me that even broken things can shine. Today I am alive because you spoke." That letter shook him to his core. He realized that no criticism, no envy, no temporary fall could outweigh the value of saving even one life. He rose again, stronger than before, with a new conviction. This was not about him anymore, it was about those he could lift. Years rolled on. Arav built an organization dedicated to mentoring underprivileged youth. He created workshops, wrote books, traveled across countries, and inspired millions. His name became synonymous with resilience. But through it all, he never forgot the riverside where it began, the borrowed books, the pharmacy where he cried. Standing one day before an audience of thousands, with cameras flashing and voices cheering, he paused. He closed his eyes and whispered silently to himself, "I made it. Not because I was chosen, not because I was special, but because I refused to give up." His story became a symbol that greatness is not reserved for a few. It belongs to anyone brave enough to fight for it, to bleed for it, to rise again and again until the mountain within them is conquered. And so, Arav's journey continues, not as a finished story but as a living reminder, that no matter how small you feel, how broken you are, how impossible your dream seems, you hold within you the power to change your life, and perhaps, the lives of countless others.